Hello, everyone, and my name is Ricardo Arista, and this is my um, chapter review for Essential Linguistics: What Teachers Need to Know, Chapter 1. The chapter starts off with pedagogical language knowledge goals. We need to know how to properly engage and inform our students. The goal is to give teachers the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions as they help students, both ELL and fluent students alike. As teachers, we should be giving our students the opportunities for language and literacy development through content. So, pedagogical content knowledge versus pedagogical language knowledge. Pedagogical content knowledge is the knowledge that all teachers need in order to properly teach their class. So, for instance, a math teacher knowing how to uh, do the process of division. Um, Pedagogical language knowledge is the knowledge of the language required to teach that content. So, for instance, knowing the difference, being able to teach the difference between divide by and divide into. So it's all the vocabulary and everything that's needed to teach division. What teachers need to know in linguistics. So when it comes to linguistics, teachers need to know first and foremost the uh, basic units of language. So phonemes, morphemes, words, phrases, clauses, discourse, along with the basic units of language. They also need to understand language dialects and varieties, how vocabulary is built, English spelling, knowing what is difficult for understanding in language, basic understanding and a basic understanding of grammar. So here we all not only do teachers need to know the the units and physical aspects of a language, we also need to understand the social context that can shape language. So, for instance, as teachers, we play several roles. We wear different hats. We are teachers as communicators, teachers as educators, teachers as evaluators, as an educated human being, and as agents of social change. So, educators as teachers as communicators. Um, we have to be aware that we need to be uh, good at communicating. We need to, and communication is a two-way avenue, not just a one-way road. It is being able to build a rapport with your students and talking things out and getting your message across effectively. Teachers as an educator, we have to understand what are the challenges of our students. How to best help them. Is a student facing a challenge because, for instance, they are having problems with a certain concept or aspect of uh, of schoolwork because of language problems or second language problems, or is it a cognitive problem? So we need to be aware of what those things are and how to best help our students. And teachers as an evaluator, we need to be able to judge the situation uh, when it comes to language use. We have to understand that not every one experiences and deals with language the same. We all experience it differently, and also have different uses for language. For instance, um, with when it comes to certain dialects of English, they're perceived differently, and we have to be aware of that. And we also have to inform our students that while there are certain dialect is perfectly fine and wonderful, there is a need and a place and a purpose for a standard English vernacular. teachers as educated human beings, um, we need to be able to have a knowledge of linguistics because, as an educated person, we should have a basic understanding of our own linguistic history, work, and how it is different from other languages that our students may speak. And teachers of agents of social change. So I think this one is very interesting. Teachers are uh, a big force in the socialization of a student. Uh, when it comes to socialization, we often see our students more than their parents do. They're with us 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Uh, so we are socializing them for one, how to interact in a school environment. So we're modeling and showing them how to participate in that. And also, we are if our students are recent migrants, we're also kind of responsible in a way to help them socialize and transition into their new culture. We are their biggest. The classroom is also a place for them to learn, acquire that kind of knowledge. So and I'm sorry about this chart. It kind of got a little wonky. Like every time I try to fix it, it gets more wonky. I don't know what's going on with my computer. Um, the three aspects of language development: learning about language, language learning, learning through language, and learning about language. So, learning language. Teachers are responsible to help their students develop their language abilities. Teaching any subject involves teaching language. So students must learn vocabulary, organizational structures common to the content area. So no matter what you're going to be doing, whether it's math, reading, writing, science, social studies, involves language. So we learn through the use of language. We are constantly bombarded with language in and out of the classroom, written, writing, posters, um, writing on the board, the whiteboard or blackboard. Uh, Spoken language is happens between conversations with students, with class discussions, with everything. So no matter where you are and what you're doing, we're constantly around language and we're learning through it. So why study linguistics? There are some major reasons here. Language makes us human. It's interesting. The well educated should know language. The study of language is the study of the human mind. So, language makes us human. Most linguists agree that language is unique to humans. Humans have syntax, humans can also make symbolic meaning. No creature can communicate the ways the way we can. So humans are really, really good at language. It's kind of like what makes us human. We also like previously stated, we surround ourselves in English. I'm sorry, in language. So language becomes the default mode of like our thought process, what makes us us. Everything around us that we have, computers, tables, desks, um, movies, TV shows, it's all the result of language. It's interesting. Students are often interested by how words come to be. In contrast, only experience language learning through worksheets. Teachers who study linguistics can take students' interest in language and engage them on linguistic investigations. So, rather than telling students exactly, For instance, like the spelling rules in English. That's like a really important thing that um, so it can sometimes be difficult to teach because of the way English structures spelling. Um, we're able to tell them the history behind of why we spell like that. For instance, if you have a word like tsunami, tsunami is spelled kind of weird, and it's not necessarily spelled the same way that we necessarily pronounce it. But the reason it's spelled like that is because it's a Japanese word. And we have an English or more English sounding equivalent, the tidal wave, more of a Western uh, word, meaning the exact same thing in English. But tsunami means a giant wave, and it is spelled that way because that's how you would spell it in Japanese. Transliterated into English, that's how you would spell it. And so you can kind of create interest. You can build on some prior knowledge. You can build on some interest and intrigue them and get them engaged with learning how to spell. And it also teaches them a little fact. Not only does it teach a student how to spell, but then also, oh wow, you just also have like a micro history lesson. Also, another lesson is like if they see a word that has tsu, it's most likely a Japanese word. I'll say so. Well educated should know about language. So language studies should be introduced in early school. Approaches to language should be scientific. So oftentimes in education, we are not exposed to uh, linguistic investigation in our early ages from K through 12. This is usually during those times we're only doing a prescriptive study of language, and we're not given the chance to explore it scientifically. So, language is the study of the human mind. Scientists cannot examine the workings of the mind directly. We can study language, the unique product of the human mind. So, kind of like how I said before, um, the human mind creates language. Um, the human mind is responsible for every single language, whether it is JavaScript, Chinese, English, or some other form of communication. It all comes from the human mind, and it all serves one purpose, and it's to connect with others and to do things, to to build, to build on what we have and what we know. So teachers are responsible to help all their students develop their language abilities. So, approaches to the study of language, language structure, language as a mental faculty, and language as a functional resource. The timeline, language as a structure. This time, this line of study has led to a great understanding of parts of speech and how these parts of speech combine into different languages. The parts of speech are nouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, articles, prepositions, conjunctions, and pronouns. So, these are the parts of speech in English, but in other languages, that might not be the case. Not all languages have these. For instance, I teach students who speak Korean, and articles do not exist in Korean. Or they kind of do, but virtually never do you use an article when speaking. It's just something that doesn't happen. Uh, Also, they have another part of speech that I'm not exactly sure of and how to explain it, but it functions somewhat like an adjective, but it's not an adjective. Like in English, we would classify that word as an adjective, but in Korean, they have a whole different categorization. They have adjectives, but they also have this other categorization that just doesn't exist in English. So that's pretty interesting. And so, not all native language have these parts of speech. Languages also have different word order: subject, verb, object, verb, object, verb, subject, etc., etc. So English goes subject, verb, object. In Korean, the student that I teach, they speak in subject, object, verb. This is very confusing if you're learning a language that has a different word order. I believe Japanese also has this word order. Chinese has a word order that's similar to English, subject, verb, object. But I always give a lot of praise to my students whenever they start to speak uh, without having to make that really strong conscious effort to to structure the sentence because it's really hard. It's crazy. Instead of saying like uh, I run up the hill, you would say I hill up run. So that makes things so confusing for my poor students, and I give them so many mad props for being able to overcome that. Implications for teaching a second language and teaching literacy. This has been a traditional approach to teaching language. Teaching grammar and vocabulary is it's a very logical approach, but it also does not enable people to communicate with the language. So I can speak on that for a little bit. It's amazing that you can learn 100 or 1,000 words in one language or know the grammatical rules. Kind of like I pointed out some grammatical rules of Korean, and I do know some Korean words. I do not think I know Korean. I know it more as an abstract concept, not necessarily as a practical concept. Likewise, I have a coworker. She is a Korean English teacher, and she cannot speak English well. Like she can speak English with an asterisk um, attached to that. She struggles with the use of English, even to communicate basic things like, um, "Can you help me make this copy?" or "Can you print off 2 more pages?" Now, granted, she is an English teacher and she teaches uh, elementary and up to high school students how to learn English, but she doesn't teach them how to use English. She simply teaches them English grammar. She is amazing at English grammar. She is so smart, so bright, and so brilliant in that regard. She knows rules in English that I only wish I knew. Uh, but that being said, oh, and she also has a really odd repertoire of vocabulary. Like her vocabulary is like interesting in the words that she knows. So she knows lots of vocabulary. I think sometimes she knows like more academic sounding words than I do, but she again can't really use it. So that goes to show you that you can definitely know the rules and how a language functions. Doesn't necessarily mean you know how to use it, and that comes that's a very interesting aspect of language and how it works. And so many native speakers of a language uh, don't explicitly know the grammar of the language that they use. Often they learn this grammar when they're teaching language. So, if you think about it, we go through life, we don't really think about the grammar that we have and the grammar that we use. It's just something that's naturally acquired and naturally developed over time for us. So, implications for teaching as a second language and literacy. We often use this method to teach reading and writing. Sadly, students often don't comprehend what they have read, and when they learn to read this way, so it's kind of like I was telling you about my coworker. She is super, super, super smart and super bright at knowing all these rules in these complicated vocab words, but she can't really. It doesn't seem that she has this has not acquired the skills to implement them. If Chomsky is correct, then we need to tap into this ability when learning a second language. This approach In this approach, we should de emphasize direct teaching of grammar. Rather, we should focus on providing language input. Without input, we or with input, I'm sorry, with input, we can develop a student's language acquisition device and develop the internal rules needed to perceive and understand new language. So we should basically be trying to teach our students a second language um, the same way that we learned our first language through the use of magic or seemingly magic by just exposing them as to as much medium as humanly possible, like whether that's through text, through reading, or through through movies, radio, sound, just giving them as much language input as possible. And then by seemingly magic, the human brain the will start to understand. The human brain was made, according to Chomsky, was made specifically for language. So, language as a functional resource. In this is more of a social approach compared to Chomsky's biological, proposed by Hilday and others. Oh, Holiday and others. So they pose two main questions. How does language function to achieve a purpose? And how do we use language to comprehend ideas? So, we develop language as a result of engaging in social interactions, i.e., how does language function to achieve a purpose? I am hungry and I want a hot dog. So, therefore, I tell the someone, hopefully someone who has a hot dog for me to eat, um, give me a hot dog. Well, how do we comprehend language? Well, comprehend ideas or using language to comprehend ideas. Well, if we have no hot dogs around, I could use language to make my own hot dogs by finding out how this process of making hot dogs works. It all involves me going out and communicating and engaging with people. Holiday so Holiday identifies three aspects of language that shape language interactions. You have your field, your tenor, and your mode. So your field, ideas that are expressed in conversations or paper. Uh, Paper as in written down. So this is kind of like the topic, the main idea. The example in the book they gave is if two teen boys were to go to see a movie, the field would be the movie itself. So if they were discussing the movie, they would be talking about like what happened in the movie, what they thought about a certain scene. So that's the field. The tenor is a relationship of the speaker and the listener, or the reader and writer, respectively. So also in the book, they showed or they gave the example of the two teen boys. They have a similar social status. They're a close relationship because they're friends. So they shape their language in that way. So, um, language or the way we speak and the way we communicate, I guess I should say, the way we communicate is completely shaped by our position in relative to the person that is receiving the message. You don't talk to a 4-year old at a daycare the same way that you talk to the banker when you're trying to get a home loan. You alter your speech to your audience and how it can be most perspective according to social norms. And so, mode. This is the way that a speaker or writer shapes their message to make it cohesive and coherent. So this is how you present it. Implications for teaching a second language and teaching literacy. As a teacher, you are to build a student's language resources so they can make choices about what language fits the expected context. So you should be exposing your students to as much language as possible and giving them a chance to experiment with it. So that way in the future they're going to have that repertoire of experiences and context to like look back on, and they're like, okay, in this situation I need to do X because of Y. And they can only get that background knowledge from previous experiences that they've run through. So students read and write for real purposes. In implementation, this model is often referred to as curriculum cycle. It is a cycle that consists of 4 stages. So let's go ahead and look at those 4 stages. You have stage 1, teachers work with students, and then so on and so forth. So, first stage, teacher works with students to build knowledge in a field. So, the teacher will present a piece of, let's say, for instance, we're learning about volcanoes this week. So, the teacher will provide some information about volcanoes, whether it be a text or something for the kids to learn through via. Next, the teacher provides the students with a sample text and subject. Together, they read and discuss the text and construct a clear understanding. They deconstruct the text and look at how the author used the language. Next, the class then works through to conduct a response and write text response to the text, such as explanation of what happened. Then, students work on their own to produce a text on the said topic that they learned about. So, next section we have is how do linguists study language? Dividing up, describing differences in units of speech, grouping and defining groups, and finding dependencies. So, linguistics is the scientific study of language. So, a linguist will study language in the same way that other scientists study their field. As in all scientific fields, the scientific method is used to answer specific questions. So let's go ahead and look at dividing up. So dividing up, a linguist must decide how to divide up a stream into distinct units that occur in a sequential order. One might do this by trying to find a pattern. Describing differences in units of speech. Not all the words are the same, so they would serve a different function. This can be done by dividing words into their parts of speech, such as nouns, verbs, adverbs, auxiliary verbs, and so on, to describe their functions and of the words. Then you have describing how units of speech can be grouped or determine the function of each group. So you go ahead and cluster in the words into groups. And then once you find that you've clustered them into groups, and you try to interpret their meaning and their function. So and then the last is to define dependencies. So in the book they illustrated this with the example does being the dependent on your new husband. So does your new husband. If you change the your new husbands, then you must use the plural form do. So the do or does is dependent. Do your new husbands. Does your new husband. So, how to teach students about language. In K through 12th, it is not approached in a scientific way. It is prescriptive to students rather than being descriptive. Students often are simply told what not to do and then drilled into doing them. For instance, like our wonderful, wonderful STAR test. That is often the way we go about teaching for said test. It is very prescriptive. We just give them a piece of paper with a bunch of rules, and we drill them on those rules, and then we test to see if they acquired what we drilled. or if they have internalized what we've drilled. So, in contrast, how we should be teaching students about language, we should be descriptive in our approach. Students should experiment with their use of language. Great writers often break the rules. That makes me think of the whole idea of, artists. A great artist will often break rules. So, for instance, you have iconoclasm, like medieval paintings, that they are total rule written. Like there is a rule for everything when you're working in iconoclastic artwork, and everything has a meaning, and everything is a specific way for a specific purpose and reason. So to turn it on the head, you have people like Van Gogh, Vincent Van Gogh. He obviously knew artistic rules and what was the norm at the time, but he said no to all of that and he did his own thing. And he is now praised as one of like the greatest artists. You know, I don't know if it still holds true, but at relatively one time, uh, recent recently the his work, The Sunflowers, was like one of the most valuable paintings in the world. And also you have works like Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso was a really good at like re- uh, realism, but he is not definitely not known for his realist work. Actually, has kind of an example of that, of how he deconstructs artistic rules and norms with I think it's like the sketch of a bull, where he had this artwork of a bull, and little by little, like kind of like a frame by frame, he deconstructed the bull until it was just like squiggles on a page that kind of like gave you the impression or idea of a bull. So yeah, a great artist, great writers, great speakers often break rules. Uh, we should think of them more of suggestions rather than hard, fast rules that ultimately have to be lived by every day, all day. Um, we should have students engage in language investigation. We should really have students learn through their own experimentation with language. So the whole example that I gave earlier in the slide about tsunami and how it's a Japanese word. Well, you know what? If you're teaching vocabulary, a great way for them to really learn and sink into that vocabulary is like, well, why do we call that word that? Like, why do we call um, anything by its name? What is it? What is its history? What is its roots? Build a connection with the language rather than simply it being there. Language is living. Language is dynamic. It's not static, and it's constantly evolving and changing. And we are part of that process. So letting your students know that, I think, is also empowering, because that makes them, or shows them, it shows them that they're active in their own destiny when it comes to language. All right, I think that is the end of the slides. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video, and I hope to see you all's videos as well. Thank you so much. So, learning about language. Our students learn a lot about language in schools. Not only do they learn about the standard things such as uh, language rules that they should be applying in either their reading or writing or speaking, but also the social context of what language is. So students learn that the language they come to school with uh, is not valued in that setting. Well, this is a possibility. Some students may experience the idea that their language is not valued. For instance, if you have a student who speaks Ebonics, or uh, that dialect of English is looked down upon. While it is, in my opinion, at least, and I think that many linguists would agree, that is a perfectly normal and fine form of speech. It is just a, by definition, it's just a dialect. It's just different. Um, uh, that being said, it's still looked down upon as uneducated, lazy, completely informal, and lacking rules, which that may not also be the case. So students should learn about language like a linguist, engage linguistically uh, in linguistic investigation. So students should be learning not necessarily um, implicit rules about language learning and then just kind of regurgitating them. Rather, they should be investigating as to why these rules are the way they are and why things function that way.